So far, we have discussed having Q&A sessions, presentations, and addressing the participants' assumptions with guest speakers. Now, moving on to the fourth type of session, it is actually quite obvious, but no one really thinks about it. So when a guest speaker comes in, you can also ask them to facilitate an activity. So Susan, can you tell us more about what type of activity would be facilitated during this session?
There can be really great activities that take a very little prep, can be very engaging, and can be done on an individual or a group basis. But let me just give an example of one on a group basis for the purpose of this video. Is often, Eva, when we talk to an audience, we talk about best practice, we talk about things of what to do, or my experience, and if I knew what I knew then, what would I do now, etc. You know what actually goes against the grain is if you ask people, well, what does failure look like? And I saw this being done once, and I have since carried it through several times myself. A guest speaker came in to speak to a group, and they were all, now they were in middle management, okay, heading for senior management, varying different perspectives of public speaking. And what this facilitator asked them was, in their groups, on a sheet of paper, right? So I can't remember if it was a flip chart, which it could have been, or an actual just sheet of paper. What could go wrong in a public speaking environment, right? So you can imagine what came up, or what if I forget everything that I'm going to say, or what if I'm late, or what if I need a glass of water, or what if there aren't any questions, right? All of these things. And then what that person did was then asked all of the group to go back after they had come up with this list and say, what would you need to do to make that happen, right? So you forget everything that you're going to say, well, I wasn't prepared enough. I didn't have a glass, or I couldn't get access to a glass of water. Well, did you have a glass of water beside you, or did you have a drink of water before you went on stage? And then the third part of this activity was then the third thing, which was, so flip what you do to perpetuate failure to the other way around, to generate a list of their own organic best practices born out of their fears in the first place. Now, Eva, it was brilliant. It was really, really good. And I do that a lot now, since when we'll say facilitating groups, or when I'm giving recommendations to guest speakers like I'm doing today, because it's something very different. It's very interactive. And when you let people talk about their fears, they've loads to say. And then you actually get to the engineered outcome, which is a list of best practice anyway. And then you can talk about your own stories. Like Eva, I can tell you so many stories about when these problems occurred, but I can also tell you how I overcame them. And then that is where you have an audience who is genuinely interested in what you have to say, because you're dealing with what they're worried about. That's the type of thing that I'm talking about. There's lots and lots of those types of activities that you can run.
That is definitely a very unique activity, which I'm sure not a lot of people do. So I feel like if a guest speaker does do it, then it will definitely stick with the participants. And how can the speaker assess the participants' work during the session?
This is one that depends on the number of people in the group, because if it is the case that it is one by one and you're walking around, you can do that if you've 10 people. And I often have. I'll give you another example. Is I'll often ask people, and I know I'm speaking about in my own case as distinct to inviting another guest speaker to come in, but just this can be another good one, is to ask people, let's say, to journal about what does their ideal day look like. And that could be if they're changing job, if they're thinking about a new career, if they're stuck in a rut, if they're transitioning from maybe working at home to working in an office or whatever. And as you walk around, that's a very introspective, personal, independent experience. I can't do that even if there's 45 people in the room. I can, but the interactions that I'm going to have with everybody is going to be short and surface. So what you need to do is, if it's groups, let's say that you have 30 people and you put them all into a group of 6, then you have 5 different groups to walk around and have a chat with. So what I would say there is, number one, manage expectations. And for anybody who's looked at all of this series, you'll know that we keep saying manage expectations, but manage expectations to say, right, you've got 15 minutes to do this. And then during those 15 minutes, be aware, let's say that you might go to 3 tables within that period of time. And then say, when you're debriefing on that first part of the activity, say, by the way, in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to go to the other 3. And that's a way in which you can really manage that. So what I would say is, number one is be aware of the size of your group. Number 2 is be aware of the quality of the interaction that you can have with the group at the time, or with the individual. And number 3, manage expectations.
And what kind of feedback can the speaker provide to the participants after they review their work?
Here is where, again, you need to read the room. It depends whether you can be critical and helpful and constructive, or whether it needs to be broadly positive. Eva, a lot of the time when we speak about people in public, it's a high enough stakes sort of an activity. If I was to talk about you and your work, or feedback that you've given me, and I'm critiquing the quality of that, it's not very comfortable if I was to say, well, you could have improved by A, B, and C in front of maybe people that you don't know, or maybe in front of your peers. So number one is read the room. Number two is give it to that it's actionable and that it's practical. It's something that they can take away and that they can go and implement like immediately. That's always really good feedback that people have. And number three, I find myself, it's helpful if you can if it's not generic, if it's personal to them. Now, if, Eva, I'm reading somebody's ideal day and they're transitioning into a different phase of their career, if I'm going to be doing that, I would have that very much on a one-to-one basis because it's personal for them. But if it is a group-wide conversation, like I mentioned earlier around fears of public speaking, that's where you can say, I really welcome the fact that you've said that. Does anybody else feel like that? Yeah. And then there can be that great sort of, oh yeah, me too. That sense of collegiate informality in a group can actually create a sense of bonding. So what I would say is, number one, read the room. If you're going to speak about people publicly in front of their peers or in front of a group they don't know, or in fact in front of anybody, just be aware of what you're saying and how you're saying it. Number two, make it actionable. And number three, make it personalised where they can actually take it and implement it. And looping back to my first point, positively.
These are some great tips, Susan. Hopefully our guest speakers will find this Q&A helpful when it comes to facilitating their own activity.